It started like any other story. It was late. Too late for anyone to be out near the old Lover's Lane, but that's where they were. Trevor and Lila, parked under the sprawling oak trees that cast jagged shadows across the ground. The moon hung low in the sky, a pale crescent barely illuminating the fog that had settled over the road. They were supposed to be safe here. At least, that's what Trevor had promised when Lila protested, her lips a tense line and her fingers constantly tapping the dashboard. The radio crackled with static before an old 80s love ballad cut through, slightly warped by the distant reception. Trevor, ever the charmer, turned to Lila with a smile that barely hid his impatience. "Come on, babe. It's just a story. There's no Hookman, okay?" Lila didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted to the trees outside. The limbs swayed like bony fingers, and the air felt heavy. It was the same story she'd heard a million times. Kids go out, something terrible happens, they barely escape. Only tonight, the air smelled different, metallic, like rusted iron. The story flashed through her mind again. A man escaped from the local asylum, armed with a hook where his hand used to be. He had a taste for blood and wandered the back roads looking for young couples, lovers who dared to tempt fate in the dark, secluded parts of the world. She thought of the scream she heard on the news earlier in the week, a woman torn apart near the edge of town. They found her car with the door wide open, and her boyfriend never made it home either. A loud thunk shook the car, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. Trevor tensed beside her. "What the hell was that?" Trevor muttered, eyes scanning the darkness. "Maybe we should go," Lila whispered. "I have a really bad feeling about this." Trevor scoffed, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "It's just a branch or something. Don't be so paranoid." He was trying to sound brave, but Lila could hear the tremor in his voice. The car shifted again, this time harder, as if something was dragging along the back of it. Trevor glanced in the rearview mirror but saw nothing except the stretch of fog-drenched road behind them. Suddenly the radio cut out, and the world outside felt deathly still. Lila's heart raced. "Let's just go. Please." But Trevor wasn't ready to let fear get the best of him. He leaned out the window, his head disappearing into the night air. Scrape. Lila froze. That sound, metal scraping against metal, came from above the car. Her eyes went wide, and before she could call Trevor back inside, she heard it again. Scrape, scrape. Trevor whipped his head back inside, slamming the window shut. His eyes were wild now, and Lila could tell he finally felt what she had. The creeping sensation that they weren't alone. He turned the key in the ignition, but the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, cursing under his breath. The car roared to life for a brief second before choking back into silence. Something hit the roof, hard, and Lila screamed. The impact was so strong it dented the ceiling, and the noise of it echoed around them. Trevor punched the gas pedal again, and the engine wheezed but refused to start. Come on, he growled. There was a pause, then a long, dragging sound across the roof. Lila's nails dug into her seat, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Trevor was mumbling something to himself, but she didn't hear him. All she could focus on was the sound. Scrape, scrape, thunk. It stopped. Silence. Trevor slowly opened the door, his hand shaking as he reached for the handle. He stepped out cautiously, scanning the area as if waiting for something to leap from the darkness. Lila wanted to call him back, tell him to stay in the car, but her voice stuck in her throat. She watched as he circled around the car, disappearing behind it for a moment. "Trevor?" she called softly. No answer. She leaned over, trying to see through the back window. The fog had thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of her. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking, but before she could dial, she heard it. A low, wet gurgle. Lila shot upright, her stomach twisting in knots. She bolted from the car, running around to the back where Trevor had gone. She saw him then, lying on the ground, his eyes wide with terror, his throat torn open in a jagged gash. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and glistening in the moonlight. His mouth moved, trying to form words. But only a faint wheeze escaped before he fell silent. Lila gasped and staggered back, her eyes darting around the trees, searching for the attacker. Then she saw it, emerging from the fog. A tall figure with a stained, tattered coat and a hook where his right hand should have been. The Hookman. He moved slowly, deliberately, the blade of his hook glinting in the weak moonlight. His eyes were hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, but Lila could feel his gaze burning into her. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root. She fell to the ground with a thud, the wind knocked out of her. Desperately, she scrambled to her feet and turned to run, but it was too late. A sharp pain tore through her back, and she felt the hook slice through her flesh, ripping her skin apart with a sickening tear. She screamed, her voice echoing through the empty woods, but there was no one to hear her. The Hookman yanked her back toward him, and she fell into his grasp, blood pouring from the wound in her back. She tried to fight, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. With a brutal swing of his arm, the hook slashed across her stomach, and she felt the warmth of her blood spilling out. Lila collapsed to the ground, her vision fading as the life drained from her. The last thing she saw was the Hookman standing over her, his breath ragged and inhuman, as he watched the light go out of her eyes. When the sun finally rose, casting light over the woods, there was nothing left of them except the car, streaked with blood, and two ravaged bodies lying beneath the trees.